Where I went to high school was on a Navy base. I wasn't in a military family, it was a civilian family working for the Navy. Mm-hmm. And so we were around the military situation. The family always talked about military, so it was not, it wasn't a big shock. Mm-hmm. We just expected to serve, and that's the way it is. When I went to University of Nebraska at Lincoln, I went through the ROTC program.
Which at that time
was mandatory. The first 2 years in college, you had to be in ROTC. You could be in the Air Force or the Army or the Navy ROTC program, but you had to be in one. And when I graduated in June of '66, I was commissioned as second lieutenant in Air Defense Artillery for the U.S. Army. And I'd already applied for Army Flight School when I was in college and had gone through the flight program through ROTC at the university. So then I went to Army Flight School in April of 1967 at Fort Walters, Texas, helicopter school. I spent 4 months there. Then I was transferred to Fort Rucker, Alabama, where I completed Army rotary wing aviator course and graduated in December of 1967 and went to Vietnam right after flight school.
I don't know how else to put this. How gung-ho were you?
We were wound. We were ready. And that's the way you have to be in the military. You have to go in with that attitude because that gives you the best chance of survival. We knew we were going, we wanted to go, and I remember in late part of 1967 having discussions with my flight school buddies that if we didn't hurry up and get to Vietnam, it was going to be over with before we got there. And so then shipped out to Vietnam the 26th of January of '68. The unit I went to was in the Mekong Delta, clear in the south part of Vietnam, at an Army air base, assigned as a helicopter pilot flying for the Army. And got there, and the folks greeted us and said it was a great place to fly. We had a paved runway, we had lawns, we had sidewalks, we'd be sleeping in bunks every night, we wouldn't be out in the field in tents, and we'd be doing a lot of flying. Could expect a lot of work to go on in the flying business, and literally a good place for an Army aviator to be. And they said, take the rest of the day off, you draw your clothing and your weapons and all this stuff at supply and get acquainted around the base, and tomorrow we'll get you to work. Okay, this sounds great. Well, that night, the Tet Offensive started of 1968. That was not in the travel brochure. Things got serious real fast. So what happened was the night of the attack, they got us together as soon as it was daylight. And the company executive officer said to us that the aircraft would be launched. They wanted them off the ground in case we got overrun. They didn't want to lose the aircraft, and they were to go to a certain point and rendezvous and move on to another airfield, whatever they had to do to save those aircraft. And he dispatched those crews, and he looked at me and another one of my flight school friends, who I'm still keep in touch with, and he looked at Lieutenant Nelson, my friend, and he says, Lieutenant Nelson, you're in charge of the west perimeter. Ground defense, move out, set it up. And I thought, wow, I got out of that one. He looked at me and he says, Lieutenant Turnbull, you're in the south perimeter. You're in charge of south perimeter, move out. I spent the first week on the wire thinking, I didn't sign up to be an infantry officer. The good news is the VC never figured out that us greenhorns are on that perimeter defense. I don't know that I was scared. I was real apprehensive. Probably would have turned scared real quick if we'd have had a ground attack happen at us, but there were a lot of other folks there, so we would have been able to deal with it. But it was, yeah. But you got to remember, when a guy is 24 years old, you think you got the world by the tail. So it took a week to get the in-country checkout in the aircraft, and then that was the first day. That was like an hour or two flight, and then the next day we started flying in earnest. And for that first 90 days, we probably flew 6 out of 7 days. And I'd logged anywhere between 8 and 13 hours of flight time each day. So that was in the seat flying. And it stayed up like that for a 90-day period. We had what we called 2 lift platoons, in other words, helicopters that did transporting, and 1 gun platoon that flew the attack missions. There were 4 such companies in our battalion. There were 2 at our airfield and 2 at another airfield. And our battalion's job was to literally support 3 Vietnamese infantry divisions. So we worked right for what we called the ARVA, the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, and rather than supporting American troops. Occasionally we supported U.S. units, but most of the time we were supporting Vietnamese units. We flew an awful lot, which is what we wanted to do. It's like you, if you're trained to do the kind of work you do, and that's what you want to do. A lot of people often said to me, well, didn't you feel exposed in the air? Wasn't that really dangerous in the air? Didn't that really scare you when you flew these combat assaults where you airlifted the infantry right into a hot landing zone and then left and then came back? And the answer is no. Well, we were trained to be in the air. That's where we were most comfortable. What we didn't want to be was the guy on the ground with the rifle. And the guy on the ground with the rifle saying, those guys in the helicopters are crazy. But we each felt the other guy was nuts. Turned out neither one of us were. That's what each of us was trained to do, and you're most comfortable in what you're trained to do. But yes, it was a highly mobile type of warfare that hadn't been done to that extent before. So everything moved by air. As an example, on these combat assaults, out of our aviation battalion, we'd have 2 companies a day on an assault, and the other 2 companies were doing resupply missions. So an assault mission, you would put together your unit so you could airlift an infantry battalion into a combat situation. A battalion would be between 500 and 800 men. And we would set it up with 2 flights of 10 aircraft, and each aircraft would haul 10 Vietnamese troops. So you'd have a flight of 10. There was a company, essentially, or a half of an infantry company, 100 men, that you were airlifted into a landing zone on one lift. And you'd go from a stage field, which may have been 10 to 20 miles out from the landing zone, and the whole battle would start with airstrikes out near the landing zone where they thought the enemy was located.
From fixed wing or from helicopters?
No, from fixed wing. It'd be the Air Force jets coming in, F-100s, F-4s generally. Sometimes it would be once in a great while, be prepped by a B-52 strike, and then we'd follow in behind that stuff. So the airstrikes would be going in. There would be artillery support with Army artillery firing into the area. And then it would be, and of course this was all planned out ahead of time where the landing zone would be, and the Army gunships and the helicopter gunships would go in just a few minutes before we did to do a low-level reconnaissance of the landing zone. Go in low and fast and check things out and see if they could draw some fire, figure out where the bad guy's located. And then we would get the word to start moving troops. And so we would launch with a flight of 10. And we would head towards certain known points on the map. And when we were like 2 minutes out, we would call the guns and say, you know, this is Warrior Lead, flight of 10 inbound, IP3, or whatever the identification point was. And they would roger us, and then they'd give us a landmark to go towards. And then we would pick up a gunship escort. There'd be a gunship on the left and the one on the right. And we were in 2 Vs of 5, tucked in tight. We would have door gunners, both left and right doors of all of our aircraft with M60 machine guns, plus the helicopter gunships on either side. We would come in across the IAP with all the troops on board. The guns would drop a smoke in the LZ to give us a wind direction and a landing direction and instructions how to get in and get out. And we would land, the lead aircraft would land literally on the smoke grenade. They'd say land to the red smoke. And so as they would land, the artillery would be lifted by the command and control aircraft. So artillery fire would stop for a minute or 2 while we were going in. The airstrike would pull off while they'd be in orbit overhead. The guns would be prepping area. They'd be firing left and right of us to get, the idea is to get the bad guy to button up, to get his head down, because he's going to duck and get shot at just like we did. So you get him to button up while you're landing. As soon as we touched the ground, the infantry troops would jump off left and right of the aircraft, so all 10 aircraft would unload in less than 30 seconds. I mean, and our idea was when we lit, we took the power or the pitch control, shoved it to the ground. As soon as it was down, we started our takeoff. And if they were still on board, they went the round trip. We didn't wait for them. So we were on the ground less than probably 20 seconds. Just touchdown, unload, and then the whole flight, all 10 aircraft would lift off at the same time and then pull out and brake left or right, depending on what the gun's instructions were. And then as soon as we were clear, which would be about 30 seconds, then the artillery fire would start again to try to keep the other guys buttoned down. Now you've got 100 troops on the ground, and that's a small unit, and they're pretty exposed. So if they got hit right then, they're in real trouble. So the guns and artillery really went to work. Airstrikes would come in and support them. And the second flight of 10 aircraft would be about 5 minutes behind us with the second lift. And so then this whole procedure would repeat. And at the end of the second lift, then there'd be 200 guys on the ground. You get that force build up, and then we'd keep repeating those lifts till we get 500 or 800 men inserted.
Were you ever hit? Was your ship ever hit?
Yeah.
Tell me about it.
Stupid mistake. I was flying a single, what we called a single ship mission, which means you go out by yourself you and your crew to do a particular job. In this case, we were to haul a Army sergeant, U.S. Army sergeant, out to a little Vietnamese outpost on a canal. And those little outposts down in the Delta were literally little three-sided walled mud forts where they would have just a few folks stationed. There happened to be a bird dog above me that day, which is an old Cessna L-19 aircraft with a single pilot in it. His job was to go out and just scout the areas all the time. And he and I chatted on the radio about the best method to approach this little location. And it was in very flat land, and it had an intersection of 2 or 3 canals that came together, and so it looked like a pie cut with kind of pie-shaped pieces of land coming up to this little compound. And along each one of these canals are trees, because that's the way they grew, and the rest of it was open rice paddies, because it was an intense agricultural region. And so I let down south of this little compound, and I flew right along these trees at a high rate of speed at about 20 feet off the ground, approached the compound and lit the aircraft. And as the sergeant got out, I said, we'll wait for you. You deposit this pay and we'll take you right back. And he goes, no, I'll stay on the ground. You'll be back this afternoon and pick me up. And I said, don't count on it. Oh, no, I'll be okay. You just come back this afternoon and get me. And I picked the aircraft up, and my mistake was I turned around and I went out the way I went in. Don't do that. I learned why in about 30 seconds. Because we were low level, we were doing about 80 knots, which is about 90, 95 mile an hour, about 15 feet off the ground. And somebody was standing in the tree line and took a shot at us and put it right through my side window, went across in front of my face, and went out through the co-pilot's windshield. I had a brand new co-pilot with me. He'd been in country for a week. And there's plexiglass laying on my lap. And I looked over at him, and he's just going, it scared him because here's this hole right in front of his face. And I remember telling him, get on the controls. You need to be on these controls with me. And just as soon as we were hit, we started a very rapid climb to get to altitude and flew on back to base. We were okay. Had a hole in the windshield, but everybody was all right. And the reason I asked him to be on those controls is if I would have been hit, the only way the aircraft would have been saved if he could have instantly reacted to it. Because I would have probably slumped forward, bumped the controls, and at 15 feet off the ground, you've literally got a part of a second before you got to react to your pile of wreckage.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah, that was close.
That was a few inches, right?
A few inches, yeah.
Yeah.
So that was the time I got.
What did you feel?
Didn't bother me at all on the flight back to the airfield. I thought, okay, we took a round, so everybody's okay. Let's go on, keep with the mission. We got back to the field and refueled, and I got out of the aircraft, my legs started to shake. I went, whoa, that was close. But then we finished the day out. We had, I don't remember, another half a day of flying it, but we never did go back and pick that sergeant up.
What did you end up thinking about the war after you got into it for a while?
Oh, I thought we were on the right track. I'm still convinced we were on the right track. The military won that war. The military did not lose Vietnam. At the end of the Tet Offensive, which went on for 90 days, we had wiped out the VC. We'd killed 90,000 VC in 90 days throughout Vietnam. We had tore up their infrastructure, their command and control structure. And militarily, we should have pressed it at that point, but that was not the political decision. The government decision was, let's back off on the bombing of the North, let's see if we can't do some other approach, and so that's what happened, and we know the result. But the military follows what the civilians direct, and that's the way it is, and that's the way it should be.